Geopolitical tensions, trade wars, inflation, supply chain disruptions, shifting regulations. No matter where we are in the world right now, uncertainty is one thing we can all count on. And when uncertainty strikes, leaders face a choice to react impulsively and look for quick fixes, or to step up, steady the ship, and guide their teams with clarity and purpose. The challenge is that uncertainty is not just complicated, it's complex. And complexity demands a different kind of leadership. A kind that resists easy answers, a kind that invites diverse perspectives, a kind that embraces the discomfort of not knowing while still moving forward with resolve. This conversation is not about having all the answers. This conversation is about equipping you with the right questions. Because in times of uncertainty, the best leaders are not the ones that have all the answers or the solutions. They are the ones who help their teams think critically, adapt wisely, and make decisions that stand the test of time. If you're leading a team anywhere in the United States of America or Canada, you right now are leading amidst the tariff wars between the two countries. This isn't just something that affects businesses at the highest levels, it affects everyday people, the teams you lead, and the decisions you make. And here's the truth. Ignoring the situation isn't an option. People are anxious. Markets are volatile. Uncertainty is at an all-time high. But as a leader, your job isn't to have all the answers. It's to show up in a way that creates clarity, stability, and trust. I was speaking with a CEO recently who told me they weren't looking forward to having this conversation with their senior leadership team, almost hoping that this will blow over. This won't. And the vacuum that the lack of conversation creates, that just festers fear and misinformation. Now contrast that to another leader who went ahead and had the conversation and made strong claims that we will be just fine, no matter what. But there are no grounds to make those type of claims either. That confidence is misplaced and most likely will backfire. That led me to realize that we need to have a conversation about leading through uncertainty, not by pretending that we have any perfect solutions or all the answers, but by asking better questions of ourselves as leaders and that of our teams, so that we can lead with more steadiness and clarity. In this video, I will share a simple framework, 4 shifts that leaders need to make during times of uncertainty. Let's start with the first one. Leaders need to shift from oversimplifying to embracing complexity. The tariff wars aren't just complicated, they're complex. And it's important to appreciate that difference between the two. Complicated problems have clear rules. They can be solved with expertise. But complex problems, they have no clear cause and effect. They have multiple unknowns and in fact, many multiple evolving variables. So when you think of things like geopolitics, market shifts, and leadership itself, those are rather complex problems. Most organizations at one time or another may have implemented an enterprise resource planning system. Now that is a massive undertaking, very complicated, many moving parts. You absolutely need to engage experts who can guide you through the planning process, and then a very diligent team that makes sure that it gets executed to perfection. Complicated, but not complex. Now contrast that with an organization that is trying to implement building a culture change or culture transformation. Culture is so nebulous in how people behave, how they think, how they act, what systems in our environment get reinforced. That is a rather complex system. And yes, experts would be helpful, but nobody really knows, except the only way that I know is through adaptive experimentation. You take stock of where you're starting, look at the environment, what you're trying to create, a culture of innovation, a culture of inclusion, whatever that may be. And then start with small experiments. Learn from them, pivot, rally the troops, and start having influence from small groups to the large organization until you tip over the greatest majority of the employees in your organization who are now behaving in the new way that defines the culture that you aspire to. That's complex. Tariff wars and the current geopolitical environment absolutely is one of complexity, not just complication. And that demands we can't just oversimplify and try to make sense of things as black and white. And yet we see it so many times. Leaders often try to make complex issues digestible by reducing them to simple cause and effect narratives. Even though this can lead to confidence, that's false confidence. And it's often paired with blind spots and poor decisions. The goal isn't to simplify. The goal is to help your team think critically and navigate uncertainty without rushing to conclusions. So I invite you to ask yourself these two critical questions. First, am I oversimplifying a complex issue just to make it more comfortable to talk about? And when you reflect on your response to that question, see if you are tending towards the black and white thinking, trying to oversimplify, and in doing so, losing some of the critical nuances that you and the team need to appreciate. Equally important, you then will have greater awareness so that you don't make any premature commitments or confidence building in your team that is not warranted. The second question I invite you to ask yourself: am I allowing my own biases or political leanings to shape how I frame this? The reason this is important is because you probably are aware that as a leader, you have a disproportionate influence on the team. And if you were to share your inclinations or preferences or leanings with the team, you may inadvertently bias the whole team to focus their thinking in a certain direction or a way. And you lose on the diverse perspectives that would have enriched the conversation and actually helped with the sense making of this really unpredictable and uncertain environment. I also invite you to ask your team a couple of questions. First, what different perspectives should we consider before making decisions? That is the gift of asking questions. They force us to think differently and deeply. This question will help your staff or team really critically appraise what are they leaning towards. And as the team hears everyone's different perspectives, what they quickly realize is that their initial instincts or leanings may be incomplete or even inaccurate. And in this way, you're able to actually encourage a truly safe, diverse conversation that allows for everyone's blind spots to be checked and for you as a team to make better decisions. The second question I invite you to ask your team is, what don't we know yet? And how can we stay open to learning? This shifts the focus from having all the answers to learning in real time. How many organizations tout to be learning organizations or have strong learning values or adaptability as a value? This question invites the team to actually live that value. In uncertainty, the best leaders cultivate a mindset of curiosity instead of rushing to conclusions. The second shift I will invite leaders to make is from one of certainty to clarity. One of the biggest mistakes leaders make in uncertainty is feeling like they need to provide certainty. But certainty is an illusion. What we can provide is clarity. And clarity doesn't mean having all the answers. It just means being honest about what do we know? What do we don't know? At least not yet. And how will we approach challenges together? A leader I coached recently around a different issue was really struggling with telling their team the actual truth of what was going on. And they wanted to provide comfort and reduce this palpable sense of uncertainty that the team was feeling. But when we started having the conversation, I invited them to reflect that is a false sense of certainty. And in fact, if you're working with capable people, they are aware of how much is unknown at this time. And they will see that false certainty and false confidence as you placating them and not actually inviting them to the table to brainstorm collectively and work together as a team. I'm happy to share that the decision that the leader made eventually was to acknowledge and have the difficult conversation to say that all the facts are not known, and the best they're doing is monitoring the situation and being prepared to pivot and respond as best as possible, as quickly and completely, depending on how the situation emerges. I think the same thing applies in this situation or any other situation of uncertainty. You sure may be a leader, but you do not have superpowers to know things that others don't yet. And to relieve yourself of the pressure to provide a false sense of certainty when all you really need to do is provide the gift of clarity, honest clarity. When I talk about making this shift from certainty to clarity, I'm really inviting leaders to have the ability to zoom out. Sometimes, especially when you're in the thick of uncertainty, you're so zoomed in that it's important to remember and have perspective of long-term thinking. One of the biggest risks in uncertainty is that short-term pressures lead us to make decisions that our future selves or our future organizations might regret. There is extensive research from Hal Hershfield, and he noted that in his book called Your Future Self, which shows that when we engage in mental time travel, thinking about how our decisions today will affect us 5 or 10 years down the line, we actually dramatically improve our decision quality. We don't just react to immediate pressure, we make choices that actually align with our long-term success. So before you feel pressure to make a decision immediately in response to the circumstances or the unpredictability and uncertainty, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what would your future self or your future organization need? The decision that you are deliberating right now, could your future self or future organization, would they be proud of that? Will it serve the long-term vision and strategy that the organization has set? Here are a few questions I invite you to ask yourself. First, am I being honest about what I know and what I don't know yet? Overpromising certainty creates trust issues later. And my God, I don't have to preach to the choir how difficult it is to earn the trust back. So my strong advice is be transparent. Your transparency will build credibility and keep your team engaged in the reality of the situation. The second question I invite you to ask yourself is, how can I create clarity without pretending to have certainty? Leaders often confuse confidence with clarity. My invitation is, instead of being laser focused on the outcomes of what will be, can you guide the way to the process of how that decision will be made? What are the considerations that you're accounting for? And who are you bringing to the table to make sure that you can get as complete a picture as possible? And the third question I invite leaders to consider, if I imagine myself looking back on this decision in 5 years, what choice would I make? Research shows that mental time travel improves decision making. So by thinking about your future self, you are able to create distance from short-term pressures and, in doing so, prioritize long-term outcomes. Here are 3 questions you can also ask your team. Starting with, what are the key areas where we need more clarity? How this helps is that instead of assuming that your team needs blanket reassurance, by asking this question, you help pinpoint specific areas where uncertainty is affecting them the most. And instead of making assumptions, you let the team tell you what those areas are. The second question you may want to ask your team is, how do we make decisions when we don't have all the information? Encouraging teams to think through decision-making processes rather than just waiting for answers helps them become more independent and more strategic. And last, ask your team, how will this decision affect us in 5 years, not just at the end of this quarter? By asking this question, you reinforce long-term thinking over short-term reactions. You really help your team, almost preventing them from decisions that would solve some of the immediate problems, but could possibly create bigger issues down the road. The first 2 shifts that you will be making as a leader will go a very long way. There are two more shifts that can make quite a profound difference in how you support and guide your organizations and your teams. The third shift I'm asking you to consider is to shift from reacting to leading at the edge of chaos. See, great leadership happens at the edge of chaos. This is where the system isn't collapsing, but it's stretched enough that real adaptation can happen. If we only react to news headlines, we'll always be in survival mode. But if we stay too rigid, we'll miss the key opportunities to pivot. So the best leaders, they create an environment where teams can think critically, adapt, and make bold but thoughtful moves. One of the senior leadership teams that I worked with about a year ago, they made a drastic reaction to a significant economic turn and basically pulled out some of the investments that they had made. And they really suffered because they reacted so quickly but ended up losing in the long run. And contrast that to another client who asked a critical question. What is the minimal viable response that we need to make in order to still stay aligned with our long-term strategy and vision without compromising our current stability? Big difference that a question can make in how the two teams chose to respond to the same economic downturn. And leaders have the difficult yet important role to help their teams stay steady and not feel the need to respond immediately. And the same is true for themselves. So here are the three questions that I invite leaders to ask themselves to support themselves with this shift. First, am I making decisions based on fear or strategy? When leaders feel pressured, they're human. They often act or react, I should say, emotionally instead of strategically. But if leaders can pause and recognize when fear is driving decisions, that can make all the difference in being able to pause and recalibrate. The second question I invite leaders to consider and reflect on: how do I ensure my team isn't overreacting, but also not underestimating risks? I completely appreciate leaders need to strike a balance. Ignoring risks would lead to bad surprises, while overreacting could cause unnecessary panic. So this question really helps keep decision-making grounded. And last question, what would my future self say about the decision that I am making? Again, mental time travel helps leaders move beyond immediate pressures and consider whether today's reactions would actually align with the big picture, the corporate strategy, the long-term vision for themselves and the organization. Here are also two questions you can ask your teams. First, where do we need to be adaptable and where do we need to stay the course? This question encourages discernment. Not everything needs to change in uncertainty. Some areas actually may require stability, while others require flexibility, and being able to discern accurately can make all the difference in a successful response to uncertainty. The second question you can ask your team is, what's the right balance between short-term action and long-term vision? Because when you ask this question, it ensures that teams don't become so reactive to today's crises that they undermine future success. Now to the final shift. And hopefully this will not come as a surprise given the method to my madness of sharing the 4 shifts and the questions you can ask yourself but also your team. Why? Because you don't have to go at it alone. So my final shift. The final shift invitation is to shift from standing and leading alone to working and leading together. Uncertainty isn't something leaders need to carry alone. In fact, the best decisions come when leaders invite diverse perspectives and shared problem solving. That really is the best way to show respect and value of the incredible, talented people that you have surrounded yourself with. A leader I coached they constantly felt this pressure or the need to have the perfect message before they addressed their team. And it took a while before they, through 360 feedback, realized that the team just wanted to feel seen, heard, and valued. They didn't need a perfect message. They just needed to know that the leader cared enough to create a safe space and not get harried with all the pieces that were moving too fast, but to commit to sense making together as a team, to working together as a team. And when the leader shifted from having all the answers to facilitating a conversation, the whole team became so much more engaged, resilient, and solution-focused. So here are the 2 questions I invite you to ask yourself so that you can leverage the collective intelligence of your group. First, am I trying to be the hero, or am I empowering my team to navigate this together? This really matters because leaders who try to carry the burden alone, they often burn out. And they also limit their team's ability to contribute. Because the truth is, empowering others actually strengthens the entire system. And the second difficult question I invite you to ask yourself is, how can I model thoughtful decision-making instead of just giving directives? And I've talked a lot about the power of the coaching habit in order to not carry the decision-making burden for the entire team or the organization. But when leaders show vulnerability and critical thinking, really they gift their teams the permission to do the same. They allow their teams to lead in a way that leads to overall smarter decisions. And of course, because you're not doing this alone, here are 2 questions you can ask your team. First, what's the smartest next step we can take right now? When you ask that question, you are encouraging your team to focus on progress over perfection, taking measured, intentional steps forward together. The second question you should ask them, or consider asking them, is how can we support each other in making informed, thoughtful decisions? This question really reinforces that leadership isn't just about the leader. It's about how the whole team works together to navigate uncertainty. And this can be so much more important if the team has a propensity or a desire to have all the pieces of information before they can make a decision or make a commitment to experiment with something. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. But leadership isn't about eliminating discomfort. It's about helping your team navigate through it with steadiness, clarity, and trust. The best leaders don't jump to conclusions. They don't oversimplify complex issues, and they definitely don't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, they ask better questions. They create clarity in the unknown, and they lead their teams to think critically and act wisely. The 4 shifts can be a transformational framework, simple, yet one that sticks and helps you lead through uncertainty with grace and with the collective wisdom of your team. If you can remember to not oversimplify complexity, allow yourself and your team to sit with it. Don't promise certainty, offer clarity instead. Don't react impulsively, lead at the edge of chaos. And don't lead alone. Empower your whole team to think critically together. So my challenge to you is this: how will you show up in this moment? Will you react to uncertainty, or will you lead your team through it? This isn't about politics. This is about leadership. And now more than ever, your team needs you to lead with strategy, steadiness, and heart. You've got this. Thank you for listening, and I hope at least one of these shifts resonated with you. Please do share how this works out for you. You can find my contact information below, and stay tuned for more updates. Wishing you endless success as you lead at the edge of chaos.